The mayor of Detroit says the census has it all wrong. Mayor Mike Duggan will be here to make his case for a growing Detroit. Former Congressman Fred Upton says it's time for a third party in American politics. He'll make his case too. And with the pandemic public health emergency over, is it, well, over? Today is Sunday, May 28, 2023, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. I hope you're enjoying this Memorial Day weekend while also pausing to honor its significance. In a couple of ways, this morning's broadcast is an extension of last week's conversations. We talked about the debate over the Detroit census numbers. Mayor Duggan hasn't been subtle or coy in his characterization of the Census Bureau's findings that show a shrinking city. He's here this morning to explain why he's sure the Bureau has it wrong. We also talked last week about whether the time was right for a third-party candidate to succeed, to actually do more than just take votes away from one side or the other. One of the leaders in that effort is former Michigan Congressman Fred Upton. He'll be here to talk about why he believes the time is finally right. And we're also going to turn again to Dr. James Baker, the U of M epidemiologist behind the Pandemic Ponderings blog. The public health emergency has been declared over, but I'm pretty certain Dr. Baker still has plenty for us to ponder. All today on Flashpoint. Well, last week we asked the question, is Detroit growing or contracting? It is a particularly urgent question if you are Mayor Duggan, who has taken issue with the Census Bureau's findings that claim Detroit lost about 8,000 people over the last year. And Mayor Duggan is here to talk about it. Good to have you back on the program.
Thanks for inviting me, Devin.
This is particularly grating on you. You've had some very unkind things to say about the way that the census ran, but explain a little bit about how why you don't believe these numbers.
The beauty of this is we're finally going to be able to challenge it. So I have my issue with the way they conducted the census in 2020, but our issue now is every year the Census Bureau updates each city's population off a formula. The formula has three pieces: birth rate, death rate, and net migration. And historically, a city could challenge it and the government would hand you their formula on how they calculated it. So in 2021, when DTE said we had 4,000 more houses, and the water department said we have 5,000 more houses, and the post office said we had 4,000 more houses, the Census Bureau said you lost 7,000 people. And we said, send us a sheet. And they said no. And we sued them. And they said, well, we'll release 22 and 21 together in May of 22. And the judge said, okay, you can have till then. So now we've challenged again.
Here we are, yes.
I'm going to get the sheet. I have no idea what formula they could be using to say net migration is a reduction in Detroit, but they're going to finally have to disclose their numbers, and we're going to be able to challenge it.
And no matter what they are, though, you would contend that they're built on, as we keep updating these, you would contend that they were built on faulty numbers to begin with.
Well, the University of Michigan went and did a study and looked at 50 blocks where the Census Bureau reported the number of houses they found, and the U of M staff went out and found 10% more on those blocks. So the University of Michigan has already told them that they're low. I just want some standard of commitment to the truth out of the Census Bureau, and so far they don't appear to care.
It has been rather an opaque process, but we do know that, at least according to the Census Bureau, of all the big cities in America, Detroit had the worst census participation. So in some ways, this is a self-inflicted problem too, isn't it?
So think about what happened. Well, in 2020 was the first year you could file your return on a computer.
Yeah.
And so I could have predicted to you Detroit, Cleveland, and other cities where people have less access to a computer in their home are going to be your lowest self-response rate, which meant you needed, I was a census taker in 1980 in Ann Arbor. I was the guy that went and knocked on the door when you didn't fill out your form the first time. You needed more of those enumerators in the streets, in the cities they don't have as many computers, and instead they put fewer in the streets. But that's, I mean, they've piled, I would say, one unprofessional practice on top of another. I don't care about any of that. I want the formula, and I want to see when you had 2,000 vacant houses have families moved in last year, when you had 500 new apartments open last year, how you possibly conclude we have fewer people.
Well, if you're the Census Bureau, there's probably a little bit of an eye roll here every time. I mean, every big city in America is struggling to keep pace with growth of some other cities, particularly the Sun Belt. I mean, we're all aggrieved, right? I mean, us, Cleveland, Baltimore.
Well, everybody's not all aggrieved. So Robert Santos, the census director, did a national apology for the 2020 count, said they undercounted African Americans in this country by 3.5%, undercounted Latinos by 5%, which in Detroit alone, he admitted they missed 20,000 people. But if you're in charge of something, you should fix it.
How much of this is still built around the mistrust of government, of census takers, of worrying about sharing information? How much of that still exists?
So it's historically been true that people of color are more suspicious when somebody knocks on their door and asks what's going on in their house. When I was a census taker in the mixed racial neighborhoods of Ann Arbor in 1980, you had a significantly lower African American and Latino response rate than Caucasian. Everybody knows that. It's been proven year after year. At some point, the Census Bureau has to actually make a commitment to count accurately. I don't want any special treatment. Just count the people who live here accurately. But this time, I think they're going to have to release their formulas, and I'm anxious to see them.
It's interesting. I don't know how many other mayors were former census takers, so it's an interesting position at which you come from. A lot of people, though, point to the fact that this is particularly acute for you because your promise 10 years ago was this is how you expected to be judged as mayor. Were we growing or contracting?
And that's how I should be judged.
Still?
Absolutely. And people of the city have been enormously supportive of me. And yesterday we opened 35 apartments in Grandmont, Rosedale. But the neighbors there were talking about 5 years ago. 15% of those houses were boarded up and vacant. Now those houses are all occupied again. People in the neighborhoods know that folks have moved back. They've seen the former abandoned apartment buildings that have been renovated. They're not paying any attention to this stuff. They know what I've done. The people of the city have been terrific. I just want us to be counted, and we got a chance to challenge now. I'm looking forward to it.
We're going to talk a lot about growth, no doubt, on Mackinac Island next week at the annual policy conference. It's clear that the governor wants to talk an awful lot about growth and trying to grow the state. We keep losing populations of the state, but it's interesting. Right. You're trying to keep people from moving to Livonia. She's trying to figure out how to get people to move from Columbus into Michigan. But they're both hand in hand, too. We've got to grow.
I don't know about trying to keep people from moving to Livonia, but you think about what's happening. The places that are growing in America are places where young people want to live and are moving in.
Right.
10 years ago, the city of Detroit, I think, was perceived statewide as a place that had 20% unemployment and didn't have much opportunity. Today, I go up north, and I run into people who say, my son's going to school down at Wayne State. My daughter got a job down in Detroit. I think Detroit is the key to Michigan's long-term turnaround in population because we are the attraction. The young people want to live in vibrant cities. And so the governor's strategy and Detroit's strategy, I think, are going to be well aligned.
You still think that's true, even coming out of the pandemic, with more and more people still deciding they want to work from home, for example?
They do want to work from home, but look at what's happening. Our housing is exploding in Detroit. The person who is going to both work at home and live at home, for the most part, doesn't want to be out in a suburban community by themselves. We are seeing them more and more want to be in the urban setting where after work they can go down, see a ball game, go out to a restaurant, go to a show, be on the Riverwalk. And so we are finding this very attractive as a place to live.
Another key ingredient to whether it's people deciding that they're moving out of Detroit or it's keeping people from moving in is public safety.
Right.
We just had the police chief say last week that in his career he's never seen as much violence as we're dealing with right now. What do you think's behind it?
There's no doubt that that's the case. So if you look at the homicides and the shootings, they're almost identical to where they were last year. But what he's talking about is there are more people carrying illegal weapons in Detroit and across the country than we've ever seen. And what used to be maybe shootings over drug turf, that's not so much what we see anymore. What we see now is a beef pops up and everybody's got a gun under their jacket. That tragic case we just saw at the gas station where $4 guy gets an argument and shoots 3 people. Yeah. That's the case that 4 or 5 years ago he may have yelled at people, but he likely would not have had that gun under his jacket. And so everything that we're doing with Dawn Eisen and the U.S. Attorney, everything we're doing with the county executive, Evans, and prosecutor Worthy, and the courts, we're trying to change the decisions so you don't put that illegal weapon in your belt when you start the day.
And critically important, we're just starting this season of all these big events. Movement this weekend, the Grand Prix next, on and on and on, all the way up to the NFL draft. We only get one chance to get this right for a lot of these things.
So, you know, after we got caught with a spring deployment the first week of April when we got summer weather, and we had 6 shootings. And we have responded dramatically. The chief has his 12-point plan. You go on the Riverwalk now, you have to pass through our metal detectors. And if you have a CCW permit, you're welcome to continue through. If you don't, you won't. We've had no issues since we've done that. We've dramatically ramped up what we have all the downtown, and there's going to be 20 of these metal detectors, and people love these evolved metal detectors. You don't have to take out your cell phone or anything, your keys. You walk through, it identifies the shape of a gun. If you have the gun, the officer will politely say, can I see your concealed carry permit? And if you don't have it, now you got a problem. I'm confident that Chief White has got a great plan for the summer.
We hope so. We will see you next week on the island. A lot to discuss there. Thank you so much, Matt Samaro. As always, we come back, we'll talk with Fred Upton. Is it time for a third political party in America? This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
The funny thing about change is, it's never around when you want it. And you really want it when you have an instant game from the Michigan Lottery. With so many to choose from and millions in cash prizes, a little play can make your day. Play large, win large. The new instant games with top prizes up to $2 million and over $179 million in total prizes.
During our Memorial Day sale, Gardner White will do what no one has ever done before. Put the best furniture in the world on sale. So now you can afford the best, like the Century Cornerstone Sectional for 50% off. That's a real half off. Or buy a Bernhardt bedroom or dining room for up to 50% off. Or bring Vanguard home for as little as $1 a day with 0% financing for 60 months. And as always, it's in stock. Plus, we deliver and set up the same day for free. Gardner White, the best for less.
Come with me to Mackinac Island as Devin Skillian and I ask state leaders the questions that you want answered. Live interviews and conversations all about jobs, investment. We're going to be streaming on Wednesday and Thursday from 12:30 to 4 on Local 4 Plus.
Get instant access to bonus content.
That is so good.
Extended interviews.
And I'm really like the self-esteem person.
And in-depth investigations.
It smells like eggs in the air. Some describe it as death.
Don't miss out. Subscribe to our YouTube channel now.
Welcome back. Mark Twain once said that everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. In some ways, you could say the same about third political parties in America. There are a lot of people who always believe that they've got a fighting chance at any given time on the long continuum of American politics, and yet they never really seem to have much of a real fighting chance, though Ross Perot came close to almost 20% of the vote more than 20 years ago. But a new movement is afoot. And part of that movement is the former congressman from Michigan, West Michigan, Republican Fred Upton, who joins me now from St. Joseph. Fred Upton, it is always really, really good to have you on the program. But you've been around politics for so long. You know all of the problems, why third parties struggle, and why their promise always seems to be a little bit larger than their reality. Why do you think it's different now?
Well, I'll tell you, when you mentioned Ross Perot, I was with George Bush 41 the very day, the very time that he got the phone call from Ross Perot saying, I'm in. And of course, his 20%, almost all of it came away from Bush supporters. Right. And he lost the re-election for a lot of reasons. This time, I really do think that it's different. And you do some polling, you do any of the circles, you take what's going to happen up at Mackinac Island this week with the Detroit Chamber. People are like scratching their heads. Do we really want to see Biden and Trump do this all over again? And they both, at least at this point, seem poised to win their own party, their respective party nominations by a pretty big margin. Of course, our governor is a co-chair of Joe Biden's campaign. Biden's got Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, the governor of California. It seems like everything's all set. And for Trump, his numbers continue to get stronger, even with the indictments that he's had. His numbers get stronger. Yet 75% of Americans who've done this in some polling say, no, we don't want this again. Can't these parties come up with a different standard bearer for the 24 election, which literally is right around the corner? The polling also shows that, unlike with Ross Perot back in '92, a third party candidate that's bipartisan. So you have a Republican and a Democrat. And you're only talking about running at the very top of the ticket, not congressional candidates down the ticket or whatever. But the polling also shows that if you have a bipartisan ticket, knowing that folks are like, we really don't want Biden and Trump on this again, it draws equally from both sides. So unlike when Perot took, in essence, all of it from Republican voters, this is equal, and it shows that, in fact, the No Labels Party can actually get over 270 electoral votes when you go individual states and look at where things are. Now, our first goal, No Labels, is to actually get on the ballot. I think we're on a handful of states already. They've acquired the signatures, so that test is made. It will be double that by the end of next month, by the end of June, which is literally right, as you know, of course, right around the corner.
Right.
Every state has different rules. We think that we can actually be on all 50 states' ballots by the end of the first quarter of next year and make that halfway through by the end of this year. So Michigan, I think, will probably start sometime this summer actually collecting signatures to get the No Labels Party on the ballot.
It's not going to be enough for you to have a party, of course, and this is really going to be just like every election. This is going to be about the right personalities. And have you been able to pinpoint? I keep saying that I cannot, we're so divided as a country, and I cannot see that figure out there on the horizon who can bring us all back together. Have you been able to identify, in your mind, you must have some thoughts about who the people are who would lead this new party?
Well, we're a little bit a ways from that. I mean, our first goal really is to get on the ballot. We actually have a planned convention for next April in Dallas, April 14th and 15th. You're going to have state delegates. There'll be a process. Next month in June, we're actually intending to have a publication with a number of different issues that we think, frankly, most Americans can support, a bipartisan agenda on a number of things, whether it be immigration, crime, guns, energy, climate. I mean, the list is long, and we're beginning to work on that now. But to actually have that document in place and then find a Republican and a Democrat who we think can work together and then really focus on these issues that, frankly, Americans want something to happen on. Strong defense, I mean, all those different things. There is a bipartisan middle that's out there. There's a lot of sweet spots. But the first item, of course, is we got to get to be a force. We have to get on every state's ballot, and that's the process now. A number of months down the road, maybe you'll see a leading contender for our ticket, but we're not anywhere close to that yet. And we've just begun to think about the process of actually selecting a man or woman Republican and a Democrat on the.
You're thinking about the process. Are you thinking as much about policy? Have you found the places where you think the middle can coalesce?
Yeah, we're starting to work on policy. We need immigration reform. We do need border security. You look at what happened here in Michigan after the tragic Michigan State shooting. The governor, I think, did the right thing in pushing her legislation, the 3 different bills that moved through the legislature. And we know that 80% of Michiganders supported what she did in the polling that they unveiled when they moved those through. I support the Second Amendment, but in fact, those bills that push through really don't infringe on legitimate needs of hunters or sports people who want to defend themselves in a meaningful way. In fact, I think we're now the 21st state that has a red flag law. And guess who signed the bill down in Florida? It was Republican Rick Scott, now the Senate, the senatorial committee leader in the Senate, and Ron DeSantis has had that all the years that he's been as governor. So, again, these things can work, but a North American energy supply, permitting reform to make sure that we get energy to the right folks, strong national defense. All of these items, first of all, they ought to be bipartisan, and I think there's some real strong middle ground where we can be together and actually form a consensus. You know, one little thought. The two chairs, a couple of different co-chairs of this group nationally. One is Joe Lieberman. The other one is Ben Chavis, who, of course, was one of the apostles with Dr. Martin Luther King way back when. Former Republican governor of North Carolina, so one of the Republican co-chairs on this. But I was with John McCain. He came this close to actually selecting Joe Lieberman as his running back in 2008. I think had he done so, instead of Sarah Palin, who knows what would have been the course
would have been
of the
such a fascinating development. So right, Fred Upton, it is always good to talk to you, and I'll be really, obviously, we will all be watching with great interest and eagerness to see where this goes and how it plays out. Thank you so much for the time, Fred.
You bet. Have a great week.
Thanks, you too.
Mackinac.
And when we come back, we'll talk about where we are on the pandemic arc. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
I love you too. Bye-bye. That was Jerry. Emma just said her first word.
Oh.
Jerry says hello and they'll be over soon.
Who's Jerry? Is he a friend of yours?
No. This Jerry. Our Jerry. And this is his wife and their little girl.
Watson's, one of the nation's largest home recreational products retailers, is celebrating its grand opening in Detroit. Save up to 50% on outdoor furniture, jacuzzi spas, above-ground pools, pool tables, and more. Plus, get interest-free financing until October 2024, only at Watson's.
What's the best way to celebrate a special birthday?
Why don't you start by letting us announce it live on Local 4 News at 5 a.m.
Sign up for a Birthday Sunshine Award today and click on Detroit.
The Sunshine Awards are brought to you by Expert Heating and Cooling. The Grand Prix is back on the streets of Detroit, and Local 4 is there at every turn. It all starts with the Grand Premiere, Friday at 6:30 p.m., streaming on Local 4 Plus. Then stay with us for live coverage inside the action all weekend long. The Click on Detroit app just got even better. Get the information you want when you need it and how you want to see it. That's right, customize your screen to your liking, comment on articles, and insiders can log in for special content. Expect more from Click on Detroit, Detroit's favorite news app.
The public health emergency surrounding the COVID pandemic has now ended. So where are we on this great arc of the early 21st century? Let's talk about it again with Dr. James Baker, Ruth Dowdone Professor of Immunology at the University of Michigan and the author of the Pandemic Ponderings blog. And I have turned to you time and time again through this pandemic. So is it wise to call it over, even though the public health emergency portion is over?
It is truly over as a pandemic. What we're left with, though, is a lot of smaller illnesses that people have identified but don't really know what to make of.
And the long COVID part of this, we don't have a working definition even for long COVID, do we?
You're exactly right. We don't know if long COVID is a single illness or multiple illnesses, and we don't really know what the long-term effect is going to be. We've studied it extensively, but the more we know, the less we seem to be able to define.
That would also, I think, apply to our understanding still of its origins. All this research into whether it escaped a lab or how it got into the population, there doesn't seem to be any consensus on that either.
It's very frustrating because we really need to do sort of a challenger type of review committee to see what's happened here. If we allow this opportunity to pass us by without really knowing how this happened and what the best practices were for controlling it, the next pandemic will be much harder to deal with.
Some other people are finding some things that maybe we didn't expect because there were so many built-in things like the free tests and all that sort of stuff. A lot of that is dried up now, and people are finding their health care changing.
Healthcare options are really falling out. And more importantly, which was really disconcerting, regular health care now has detrimented because I think a lot of it has gone by the wayside during the pandemic. I'm really concerned about things like video health that may go away, that have provided a lifeline for a lot of people that can't get to the doctor. I think these things need to be brought in as sort of a long-term measure.
Because these were covered when there was a public health emergency, and now they no longer are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, we've proven their value. We need to make them part of the healthcare system.
Given how many things that we don't know then, about long COVID, about the origins, how much have we really learned, do you think, from this massive public health emergency?
Well, it's sort of binary. We've learned enormous science around this. We've learned how to make vaccines and drugs as antivirals very rapidly and very effectively. The genetics has been transforming. We're able to look at a virus very quickly now and know how to address it. And remarkably, we've learned a lot about the human immune system. We figured out how many elderly people who were prone to infections have an autoimmune disease that actually takes out part of their immune system and makes them very susceptible to this. What we haven't learned about are the social impacts and the way to control this. And we haven't looked at best practices. People keep pointing to Florida versus Michigan versus New York.
Right.
Those are all different states, and we need to learn from that. And it's a little embarrassing that all these people have died, and we haven't tried to bring out best practices for what's happening.
And the same as comparing, say, the U.S. to Korea or to Sweden. It's really cumbersome and maybe not helpful.
It's actually crazy because these situations are so different. You know, you really have to do a multifactorial analysis to understand what happened and what worked. You know, since we don't even want to do it between states in the U.S., doing it between countries seems almost impossible.
One big component of this, though, that seems to have lasting impact on healthcare is the mRNA vaccine, right? That shows promise for many other uses going forward.
The mRNA vaccine will become a fundamental tool to vaccinate people for a lot of respiratory diseases. I think what we need to do right now is do longer-term studies on its success and its safety so that people are convinced. I'm very disconcerted that we leave this pandemic with maybe a greater concern about the safety of vaccines than we entered it.
Still, unfortunately. Dr. Baker, thanks so much for I know we will still, because we'll have something else come along. Thanks so much for being here.
You.
We are heading up to the Mackinac Policy Conference this week. You can watch Christy McDonald host our live coverage on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons from 12:30 to 4 p.m. on Local 4+. Next Sunday, we'll bring you Flashpoint from the island as well. Have a great long weekend. Thanks for being here.